Hey everybody, good morning. Okay, so we have so much to talk about today. It's kind of crazy. It's Elizabeth Cronnice McLaughlin. It's the 18th of November, 2019. I'm going to give everybody like a quick minute to log in here, but we are in for it this week. I mean, I think everybody knows this, but there is a multitude of witnesses testifying this week on impeachment. We have a whole slew of new breaking news stories that are out there right now that even as recently as this morning, we're taking up a lot of airtime. And you all have asked some really phenomenal questions today. So let me just start by saying this. Like, I want to draw attention to something that happened over the weekend, which was run through a lot of us who were on the board of directors at Demcast. You all may remember, or rather the board of advisors, you all will remember that I was invited to join the board of advisors for Demcast, which is this whole new democratic media platform heading into 2020. So one of the outcomes of that was that a lot of us who were on that board of advisors over the weekend got behind Tedra Cobb, who is the opponent of Elise Stefanik in upstate New York. And over the course of 3 days, we were able to raise more than $1 million for Tedra Cobb and get her number of supporters up almost up to 250,000. So I just want to point something out about this because, you know, we're all getting organized now to amplify other candidates that really need to flip important seats. What happened with Tedra Cobb was an example not only to the public and to the GOP, but also to all of us, you know, with these kind of like bigger platforms of what we can do when we all get together and organize around the same sorts of issues. So what happened with Tedra Cobb was phenomenal. I will say that I'm really proud of all of the work of everyone involved in that effort to really get behind her, donate to her, make a difference, and do it fast. I don't think any of us who kind of like came together in this sort of very organic way to do it had any idea that the outcome was going to be as significant as it was. You know, I mean, this is proof. You know, I said it yesterday, but I'm just going to say it here again. You know, this is proof of the fact that we're organized. We can be well funded when we do it from a grassroots standpoint, and that you know, from the standpoint of making a show of strength. You know, the president got behind Elise Stefanik yesterday. It didn't stop Tedra Cobb from getting to $1 million in donations. So it's a really interesting place to be in, to know that all of this, you know, what looks to just be like, hey, growing social media platforms, people want to follow us and talk about the issues that we care about, and we're here to educate and grow, actually now is really a force to be reckoned with for 2020 in terms of the organizing of those of us with larger platforms together as a force. And so I'm really grateful about that, really proud about that, really thankful to all of you who donated to Tedra Cobb over the weekend and amplified that effort, because it really made a huge difference. So I'm amplifying a couple of other candidates as of this morning. One is Phil Arballo, who is a Latino running against Devin Nunes here in California. He himself raised $100,000 over the weekend, which is extraordinary. Also want to shout out Desiree Timms, who's running against Jim Jordan. I donated to her last night. I have been amplifying her last night and this morning. Again, we've got candidates running in very significant seats to overthrow very significant players who really need our financial, our emotional, our political support right now as we head into 2020, and who really need to become nationwide and household names. Because one of the other things that was really profoundly interesting about where we found ourselves with regard to Tedra Cobb is that her donations are coming in from all over the country. And the same needs to be done for those seats that we really care about. You know, this is not the way that things used to be done. The way that things used to be done at this, you know, in history was that, like, you raised money locally, and then you got some support from the DNC machine in the event that your race looked like it was winnable. We're now in a position where part of being activists means growing nationwide support for candidates in local races that really matter, and that actually will make a huge difference in terms of the balance of power in the House and the Senate, because major players will no longer be in their seats. So all of that was huge over the weekend. And again, I just want to like shout out the possibility of it, the lessons that it taught to all of us, the lesson it taught to the GOP, by the way, about what we will do when they seek to pull a stunt like that. You know, and Stefanik also, to be fair about it, sort of like dug the hole deeper every single time she went on social media this weekend. And, you know, I think that at this stage of the game, we really need to kind of think through how we're going to support local candidates to push people like this out of office. All right. So that's that. That was a huge thing this weekend, really important. All right. So let's talk about what's happening this week, because it's a lot. There are impeachment hearings Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week. I was mistaken, by the way, last week when I said Fiona Hill was testifying on Friday. She's testifying on Thursday all day long. On Wednesday, we have Gordon Sondland testifying. Tomorrow, we have Vindman and Williams, who is Pence's assistant, testifying in the morning. 2 other witnesses testifying in the afternoon. This week is going to be a barn burner. And, I will just tell you that, while I'm planning on watching all of it as much as I can while still doing my job, one of the things that I am particularly curious about is Sondland and how forthcoming he is in light of the fact that Roger Stone was convicted last week of lying to Congress. And we already know that Sondland has withheld certain key information in the past and already had to revise his testimony. And I'm also really interested in Fiona Hill, because those of you who looked at her transcript will remember that Fiona Hill's testimony in her deposition was fiery. It took no shit. She called out the Republicans for their conspiracy theories and for their lack of patriotism, like on the record. And I'm expecting that we're going to see more of that from the standpoint of what we get from her in public hearings on Thursday. So it's going to be a heck of a week. And I will just remind you all that, the president is going to do everything within his power to distract from what's happening here. This morning he tweeted something out about, oh, maybe I'll go to the Hill and testify. That's not going to happen. And I just want to reiterate this. It's a pattern of what we saw in the situation with Robert Mueller. The House is not going to get into some protracted negotiation with the president about trying to get him to appear. It's not going to happen. So we all need to kind of stay very, very focused at this point with regard to the hearings that are coming up this week, the evidence that is being put forward, and the case that's being made. So on that front, I just want to mention that there were some very interesting polling numbers this morning that came out about the outcome of public opinion after the hearings last week. So one of the most interesting polls to me this morning was that 70% of the American public, 70% now are opposed to the president asking for foreign interference to investigate a political opponent. 70% of the American population now knows that what the president did was wrong. The impeachment numbers asking for impeachment and removal are now sitting at around 51%. I agree with those who are out there this morning saying that, we get to 55% on impeachment and removal. It's going to start to become incredibly hard for the GOP and the Senate to defend what's happening here. In part because 55% of the American public demanding that a president be removed bodes very serious things for the 2020 election in the Senate, in the House, and for the presidency. So, these polling numbers are very, very significant. And I'm just going to remind you all that, notwithstanding the fact that I think polls can make people complacent, we all have to keep doing all the work that we've been doing to push public opinion and to push the Senate forward. But I'm just going to mention one thing. Nixon's approval rating on the day he resigned was 29%. If there's only 30% of the American public that thinks that what the president has done with regard to Ukraine is okay, that is a pretty significant comparator for the sake of the GOP. So we got a lot more to see here, coming up in terms of how this sways. But the one other polling number that to me was quite significant in the polls that came out this morning were that when they asked people about when they had made up their mind about needing to have the president removed, 21% of the people in this poll said that they made up their mind after last week's hearings. So this is another indication, I just want to say, another indication of the importance of the public hearings, of the importance of amplifying the narrative that is coming out of these hearings. And it also, by the way, is a pretty big indicator that the efforts that the GOP are making to distract, diminish, pull away from the facts here are failing. And that's really good. I mean, they should fail because, they're not really combating anything based on the evidence. What they're actually doing is just combating the process. But all that said, these polling numbers today are extremely positive in favor of future movement. And that's after only 1 week of testimony, right? By the end of this week, we may well be into the 60s in terms of the desire to impeach and remove this president, because I can pretty much guarantee you that what we're going to learn from Sondland, what we're going to learn from Williams, who was detailed to Pence's office from the Department of State, and who the vice president's press secretary backed away from in a really kind of surprising way this weekend. I mean, maybe not surprising, nasty way this weekend, by referring to her only as a State Department employee and not as somebody who's been detailed to the vice president, lends us, in favor of very strong testimony coming out this week. And, let me just say this whole thing of like, these are all never Trumpers. These are not never Trumpers. The people who are testifying this week are people who donated $1 million to the president's campaign, the vice president's own State Department detail. Fiona Hill, who's got, again, lifelong public servant, has met the president, has been in the room with the president. We're also going to hear this week from people who were on the call. Vindman, who was responsible, by the way, for prepping the president for the call, the first call this year with Zelensky. I mean, there's a lot that is going to turn on the testimony that we hear this week. And, it would not surprise me to see these numbers tick up even further by the time we get to Friday. So buckle up. It's going to be a week. It's going to be a week. All right. So a couple other bits of breaking news this morning that are very significant. We learned this morning that Trump is now being investigated by House Intelligence for perjury in the Mueller investigation. He's being investigated for potentially lying under oath in the written questions that he responded to Robert Mueller. So let me all just remind you, Bill Clinton was impeached for perjury. There can be no debate that perjury is an impeachable offense, let alone there's quite a number of people, including people like Lindsey Graham, who went after Bill Clinton for perjury and claimed that it was an offense that required removal from office during the Clinton impeachment. So it's going to be, this again is going to be one of those moments where for the GOP, it's going to be very hard to overcome the possibility of a perjury article of impeachment in the event that House Intelligence decides to submit one to the House Judiciary. At this stage of the game, the way the dominoes are lining up here strategically makes it incredibly difficult on the facts, on the evidence, and on the counts that are potentially included for the GOP to defend it, right? Reminder, bribery is the second crime that's enumerated in the article, in the section of the Constitution concerning impeachment. So there's not any debate if the president engaged in bribery or by that way, extortion, which is bribery by force. And there seems to be very little debate. There was a statement this morning from Eric Swalwell that in his opinion, as a member of the committee, it's both. It's going to be very hard for the GOP to fight back against the way that this is lining up. So that was a really interesting little bit of breaking news this morning. Also breaking this morning, we learned that there has been a pay-to-play scenario with the Republican National Committee over the ambassadorship to the Bahamas. So you'll all remember that Gordon Sondland was appointed as the ambassador to the EU after he made $1 million donation to the Trump campaign. It has long been the case on both sides of the fence, I don't want to diminish this, that ambassadorships have been, especially plum ambassadorships, have been given to big donors to presidential campaigns. That said, what's curious about this pay-to-play situation is that the nominating process for the nominated ambassador to the Bahamas was held up in the Senate. And at that moment, the RNC, he's still, by the way, not appointed, 2.5 years in, almost 3 years in. The RNC at that point went to him and said, well, why don't you make a $500,000 donation to the RNC and we'll push through your nomination. We'll push forward your nomination. That in and of itself is an incredibly unethical request. The nominated ambassador denied that request. However, his wife made a $100,000 donation to the RNC. And all of this, as it flows together, in my opinion, also explains a couple of other interesting things, which is that that we've seen these huge fundraising numbers coming out of the RNC, and there's been all this discussion about how much money Trump has been raising. Well, it's a very big question whether or not that money has been actually raised from legitimate sources or whether it's being raised through these kind of weird pay-to-play arrangements inside the administration. It's odd. So that in and of itself is an investigation now that's happening into the Republican National Committee, not even Trump, that should raise some very significant eyebrows. And again, I have said all along that while not every Republican is corrupt, we have seen quite a bit of corruption at the top of the Republican Party going all the way back to the Republican National Convention in 2016. And before that, as we've now learned, as in terms of how money has been routed to candidates through various very questionable sources. So that in and of itself as a breaking news story this morning, also very significant. Okay, yet another breaking news story, this was yesterday, is that Rudy Giuliani is now being investigated with regard to this sort of like personal interest in liquid natural gas in Ukraine, concerning whether or not he leveraged the Ukrainian natural gas entity, the state-owned entity, to try to get money for himself. So one of the reasons why the more details that are coming out about Giuliani are raising a lot of eyebrows is because you'll remember there was that weird butt-dialed phone call that he made to the reporter where he was overheard talking to someone saying, we need to find $100,000, we need money. Big questions have been raised because Giuliani says he's working for the president for free as to how he's being compensated and by whom for this work. We know that he took some money from Lev Parnas, which was routed directly from a Russian oligarch. But there are other ways in which Giuliani's personal interest in all of this have yet to be explained. And so this other issue of, like the shadow campaign, the sort of leveraging of Ukraine to investigate the Bidens and to interfere in the 2020 election that we know Rudy was a big part of, are also now being added in the chain of discussion to how Rudy was leveraging all of this for his own personal benefit, which, by the way, is also corruption, right? Like, he's not supposed to be out there trying to cut a natural gas deal on the side with Rick Perry. Sometimes you just have to laugh. While he's trying to get Ukraine to investigate Trump's political opponents, like the layers of illegality here are just nuts. So that's another little bit of breaking news that we got over the weekend. I'll just say this. I am quite surprised at this point that Rudy Giuliani has not yet been indicted. Again, I said this like a month ago, but I'm going to say it again today. I don't see any way that Rudy Giuliani gets out of this without being indicted. It just, at this stage of the game, he's so thick in this that, his potential prosecution seems quite likely. Reminder, Parnas and Fruman are being tried in the Southern District of New York for conduct that directly relates to this whole chain of events in Ukraine. All these Venn diagrams are converging, and the president is at the center of them with Rudy Giuliani right there with him. So it's again going to be an interesting thing to watch, but I can't imagine at this point that Rudy Giuliani is not going to get indicted and tried unless he settles or flips, which is very unlikely to happen. So, we shall see. All right. Other bit of craziness that happened over the weekend was this unexpected, again, sometimes all of this just gets so nutty, you just can't help but laugh. This unexpected trip that the president took to Walter Reed in the middle of the weekend. Because, anybody who's ever had an annual physical has had that annual physical conducted in stages. So let's just talk about what we know so far about what happened here. Okay, let's just discuss it. The president apparently went to Walter Reed on Saturday, the middle of the afternoon. There's video of him going to Walter Reed where he leaves the White House, not in the presidential limo. There are Secret Service agents running all around him while he is getting into the limo. The White House physician runs to the it's not the limo, it's an SUV, runs to the SUV and gets in and rides with the president to Walter Reed. Also really, really, really weird, right? Because there's a White House medical office on site at the White House. So whatever was going on there was something that was beyond their capacity to handle. And then he stays at Walter Reed for 2 hours. Learned this morning that he apparently left under the cover of darkness, presumably because there was a desire for him to not be filmed, leaving, coming or going from the White House. No public events yesterday after that event. No public events today on a Monday. So there's really big questions being raised right now about the president's health and well-being and what really happened at Walter Reed and what this whole thing was really all about. And I will just remind you all that the health of the president is a national security issue, right? If he had a panic attack, if he had a heart attack, if something else was going on that we didn't know about, and there's the possibility of blackmailing him for that. Or, they've actually diagnosed a significant mental issue. So, one of the things that's concerned me quite a bit over the weekend is that we really have not seen the media following up on this to the extent that we would normally expect. And I have really, really big questions about, what's going on here with regard to the president's well-being, given this strange trip to Walter Reed. Totally unscheduled. His prior physical was in February. No reason for him to be going in the middle of November. It's just, the whole thing is just really weird. So again, presumably at some point, maybe 10 years from now, we'll learn about what happened over the weekend with this emergency run to Walter Reed. But it's very, very odd, just very, very, very odd. Of course, wouldn't surprise me if it was a panic attack or something else, but the whole thing is just very strange. The video itself is very strange. All right. We had a question today about what happens if Trump is impeached or resigns, leaves office, Pence becomes president. How does the next vice president become nominated? So for those of you who are longtime viewers of the broadcast, you will remember that I went through this whole process several times about a year and a half ago. Let me just give you the short version of explanation here. When the vice presidency becomes vacant because a president has been removed from office or has resigned, and the vice president becomes the president and has an opportunity to nominate a new vice president to that role, that person must be confirmed by a 2/3 vote of both the House and the Senate. So the thing that raises very curious questions here right now, in the event that this president is removed, and this is one of the reasons why we've talked for so long on this broadcast about the way the dominoes may fall here, is that let's just say hypothetically Trump is gone, Pence becomes president. He's got to nominate somebody to be vice president who arguably can meet the requirements of a majority House of Representatives that is Democrat. Because they're not going to get a candidate passed unless it's someone that the Democrats approve of, given that the Democrats have a majority in the House of Representatives right now. So it's a very curious hypothetical potential scenario that could develop here in the event that the vice presidency becomes vacant for one reason or another. By the way, I will remind you all, second in line to the presidency right now is Nancy Pelosi. And in the event that Trump is impeached and then Pence and removed and Pence ascends and then Pence is impeached and there's no one in the vice presidency slot, Nancy Pelosi is the president of the United States. So there's just layers and layers of the way that this could fall. Now, let me just say this. My expectation is that the Republicans are already thinking about this. And it would not surprise me to see somebody like Mitt Romney get nominated for a slot like that in the event that the president is actually removed. It would not surprise me to see like a more moderate woman put into that role, frankly. I mean, God knows, I hope it's not Nikki Haley after her performance last week and all sorts of other things. But, frankly, they're going to have to find someone who the Democrats can at least nod their heads at. And so, I think that, again, we have to see how this all plays out. We have to get him out of office first before this even becomes possible. But it raises a very curious strategic consideration, given that the 2/3 vote in the House has to be accomplished in order to fill that vice presidential slot. And I just want y'all to think about what the pressure would look like. In the event that Trump is actually removed, Pence becomes president, there are threatened articles of impeachment against Pence, and there's no one in the vice presidency. I mean, that's a hell of a leverage point for the Democrats, frankly, let alone heading into 2020. It's very curious. All right. One last bit of news that I just want to talk about. Nancy Pelosi over the weekend did not put a limit on the length of time that this particular aspect of impeachment hearings was going to continue. And that's legit. Like, let me just say that. Like, I think that she's probably hedging her bets in terms of the timing of when we're actually going to see a vote on impeachment in the House. But let me just point something out. The witnesses that testified late Friday and on Saturday morning with regard to this call that Sondland had outside on a patio where Trump was screaming into the phone and it was overheard by various people. And the witness who testified on Friday night described this. There are very few witnesses after this week, save those two individuals, who will not have testified publicly in public hearings before the committee. one of the things that means is that in the event that this goes the way that it appears to be going, right? Like that, impeachment is going to be limited to this universe for now, because I will remind you all that, new articles of impeachment can be filed every day, right? But assuming that we're limiting the scope of this particular window to Ukraine, there's not going to be much more to go by the end of this week. And one of the things that raises the specter of is, we've got another week. We have Thanksgiving coming up. So that week is probably going to be shot. Notwithstanding the fact that House Intel has continued to work through breaks, my bet will be that we will probably not see a vote until after Thanksgiving at this point. But regardless, most of the evidence is going to be in the public domain by the time we get to Friday. And so we could see articles of impeachment filed this week. We could certainly see them filed by the beginning of next week. And then the question is just when the vote's going to be held in House Judiciary and when they're going to get to the floor of the House. So we're in it thick, and I don't think, I said this morning, buckle up for this week. I think we're probably going to have to buckle up for the week of Thanksgiving to at least a certain extent, those first couple of days. And then we'll see where we are come the 1st of December, because this train is not stopping right now. I can tell you that. All right. That's it for today. I want to thank you all again for all your support of Tendra Cobb over the weekend. Please remember to continue to support Devin Nunes' opponent, Phil Arballo. Please remember to support Desiree Tims, who's running against Jim Jordan. Remember that we've got good candidates out there who are running in seats that now appear to be flippable. And I should just finish by mentioning what happened in Louisiana on Saturday, because the Democratic governor of Louisiana was reelected, which was not predicted by the polls. Trump went down there 3 times, including last week, to campaign for the governor's opposition candidate and lost. And so we're seeing quite a bit at this point of indications that places that have historically been red, that had gone for Trump in double digits in 2016, are now flippable seats and states. And one of the things that means is that we've got to be really organized and well-funded in terms of what we do going forward heading into 2020, because the opportunity is there. All right, that's it. One thing I want to say about this week in light of the hearings, please stay tuned to the Patreon feed for timing, because if there's a significant bit of testimony happening, like Vindman's up tomorrow morning, I may not go live at regular time until he's done, because I want to make sure I can give you guys all the analysis that you need, and also that I'm not taking you away from your duty as a public citizen to pay attention to all this sort of stuff. All right. So much love to all of you. I will talk to all of you tomorrow at some point. I'll talk to all of you every day this week at some point. And hang in there, and please continue to make your calls to pressure those moderate senators. It's really important. All right. Bye.